Every empire makes the same promise. Our money is solid. Every government swears the same oath. These guarantees will last forever. And every single time. History makes liars out of all of them. Rome, France, the Confederacy, Lebanon. People went to bed thinking their savings meant something. They woke up and poof, gone. Salaries that bought houses now bought bread. Maybe. Futures they'd spent decades building? Stolen. By the very systems they trusted with everything. Here's the thing nobody wants to hear. Collapse isn't some rare disaster. Collapse is the default setting. The real question was never, will the system fail? It's, what do you do when it does? And that's where most people get it catastrophically wrong. We stare at bank balances, we check our accounts, we look at national currencies backed by, well, flags and feelings, and we assume it's all bedrock, permanent, safe. Money isn't bedrock. Money is trust. And trust can evaporate before your morning coffee gets cold. That's why history isn't just brutal, it's useful. Every collapse leaves behind a trail, patterns, warnings, a roadmap showing what actually protects wealth and what turns to smoke. Pay attention and you'll notice something. The survivors, they weren't the true believers. They weren't the optimists. They were the doubters, the skeptics, the ones who looked at the system and thought, yeah, but what if this all goes wrong? Those people kept their money. Everyone else learned an expensive lesson. Let's start with Byzantium. You probably know it as the eastern half of Rome, the part that somehow kept going for 1,000 years after the West crumbled into rubble and memory. At the center of Byzantine commerce sat the gold solidus. This coin was so reliable, so consistent, that merchants from London to Baghdad accepted it without hesitation. No questions asked. For centuries, it was basically the medieval world's reserve currency, the dollar of its day. Now here's where it gets painfully predictable. You'd think the Byzantines would have learned from Rome. We're talking about Rome's silver denarius, the coin emperors kept debasing until it was basically tin wearing a silver costume. That story's been told. Lessons were there for the taking. But no. Centuries pass, and what do the Byzantines do? The exact same thing. Just with gold this time. They started shaving the purity, stretching it thinner, mixing in garbage metals to make more coins from less gold. Genius. Or catastrophically stupid. Definitely one of those. At first, nobody noticed. The coins looked the same, felt the same, spent the same. Then the cracks appeared. Then trust shattered. And suddenly, this coin that had anchored Mediterranean trade for generations became what? Political fiction. A promise wrapped in increasingly worthless metal. The Byzantine economy lost the stability that had defined it for centuries. Poof, gone. But here's what money never learns keeps finding in these stories. Something always survives. Not paper promises, not government decrees, not imperial declarations carved in stone. The merchants who quietly hoarded actual gold, the real stuff, not the diluted coins, they made it through. The ones who'd bought land outside imperial control, they watched their wealth hold steady, while everyone else saw theirs evaporated. And there's your first timeless lesson. Governments cannot resist the temptation to water down their money. They never could. They never will. And when they do, real value runs to assets they can't counterfeit. Write that down. Tattoo it somewhere. Whatever works for you. But wait, not every collapse comes from rulers playing games with coins. Sometimes destruction arrives from nowhere. No warning, no villain to blame. Europe. The Black Death arrives. Over the next 4 years, half of all Europeans died. Half. Imagine that. Imagine looking around your office, your neighborhood, your family, and half those faces are gone. Cities emptied, villages straight up vanished. Trade routes that had connected kingdoms for generations just broke. And yet, and this is the weird part, the economic story isn't just tragedy. Because something strange happens when half your workforce disappears overnight. Labor becomes precious. Survivors could suddenly demand higher wages. Land and food that had been scarce, now there's plenty compared to how many people are left to use it. Families with liquidity, silver, goods, even just the ability to work, suddenly had leverage they'd never dreamed of. Land that once cost a fortune, bought for pennies. Houses standing empty, fields sitting unplowed. If you had anything to trade, you were in a buyer's market. Sound familiar? It should. COVID, 2020. Supply chains collapsing. Governments printing trillions upon trillions to keep the machine from seizing up completely. And then a wave of inequality that would have made medieval peasants wince. Those with liquidity, they bought assets, homes, stocks, businesses, everything. Those living paycheck to paycheck, they slipped further behind, and further, and further. In America, housing prices went through the roof while millions scrambled to cover rent. Stock markets recovered almost instantly, almost mockingly fast, while regular people wondered how they'd eat. The rhyme across 7 centuries is deafening. Pandemics redistribute wealth. They always have. The survivors of the Black Death used scarcity to climb social ladders that had been locked for generations. The survivors of COVID with cash in hand scooped up everything that desperate people could no longer hold on to. The lesson isn't comforting, but it's true. Crises reward those with reserves. Crises punish those without. Brutally, every single time. Now, pandemics show us how fast external shocks can flip an economy upside down. But Florence? Florence shows us something just as important, maybe more important. Institutions that look too big to fail can fall like dominoes. The 1340s. Florence was Europe's financial capital, home to banking dynasties with names like Bardi and Peruzzi. These houses were powerful. They lent money to kings. They moved currencies across continents. They were the Goldman Sachs, the J.P. Morgan of their era. And they made one catastrophic mistake. They lent heavily, massively, irresponsibly heavily to Edward III of England. The guy needed money for his wars with France. Seemed like a good bet. He was a king. Then Edward stopped paying. Bam. Banks collapsed. Depositors, people who trusted these mighty institutions with everything, ruined. Trade froze. Florence, once rich and powerful, spiraled into chaos. The ordinary citizen who looked at those impressive banking halls and thought, "My money's safe there?" They discovered something that should haunt everyone with a savings account. Size is not safety. Reputation is not protection. Too big to fail is a lie as old as finance itself. Institutions exist to profit, not to guarantee your survival. When they fall, and they will fall, they take your savings with them. They don't care. They can't care. It's not personal. It's just collapse. This lesson doesn't stay in medieval Italy. It echoes through every century, from Florence to Lehman Brothers in 2008. From Renaissance banking houses to Lebanese banks freezing accounts in 2019. Survival belongs to those who understand one brutal truth. An institution's promises are only good until the day they aren't. And they never warn you which day that'll be. The American Civil War. Most people remember the battles, the politics, the abolition of slavery. But behind the gunpowder and the speeches, a financial war that most Americans today couldn't explain if their savings depended on it. Which is ironic, because their savings do depend on understanding it. Both sides, Union and Confederacy, discovered something terrifying. War on that scale requires printing money, lots of money, more than exists, more than you can tax, more than you can borrow. So you print it. In the North, the government issued greenbacks, paper currency backed by, well, the promise of the United States itself. Not gold, not silver, just trust. At first, bold, patriotic, exciting even. But the more greenbacks flooding the economy, the less each one bought.
Inflation ate away at value. Trust started to wobble. The South? Oh, the South had it way worse.
The Confederacy, desperate beyond measure, printed graybacks in staggering quantities. We're talking money printing at 4 in the morning because the army needs paying levels of desperation. By war's end, Confederate inflation had reached levels that break your brain to imagine. Prices up thousands of percent. Thousands! Soldiers' paychecks worthless before they could spend them. Families carrying bags, literal bags, of bills that couldn't buy bread. By 1865, Confederate currency wasn't weak. It was dead. Completely, utterly, irreversibly dead. What held value? Land, food, gold, anything real, anything the printing press couldn't create from nothing. For ordinary Southerners, this was devastation. Lifelong savings? Dust. For opportunists with tangible goods, it was a fire sale. Property at pennies on the dollar. Wealth transfers that would reshape families for generations. Here's what Americans should never forget. Your own country has already lived through a currency collapse. It happened, on this soil, to your ancestors. And protection didn't come from trusting the paper in their wallets. It came from holding value the system couldn't inflate away. France offers another masterclass in destruction. This time, revolution-flavored. The 1790s, revolutionaries had toppled the monarchy, seized church lands, needed to pay for, well, everything. So they invented a new paper currency, the assignats. In theory, these notes were backed by confiscated property, solid, real assets. What could go wrong? Everything. Everything could go wrong. The government printed assignats with abandon. Each new batch diluted the last. Prices spiraled upward while wages couldn't keep pace. Soon, the assignat was worth less than the paper it was printed on. Farmers refused to sell food for it. "Give me goods," they said. "Give me silver. Keep your patriotic paper." In Paris, bread riots returned. The revolution, that great engine of liberty and equality, devoured itself. Inflation was the knife. The winners weren't the ones clutching revolutionary currency. They were the ones holding food, gold, property, things governments cannot print into existence. For ordinary Parisians, the lesson came too late. Promises, no matter how noble, are only worth what others will accept in exchange. When trust breaks, savings don't shrink, they vanish. Skip forward 2 centuries. Asia, 1997. What started as a speculative attack on the Thai baht spiraled into a continent-wide catastrophe. Thailand had borrowed heavily in dollars. Heavily. Confidently. Why worry? Their currency peg would hold. Everyone said so. The experts agreed. The experts were wrong. When the peg collapsed, debts denominated in foreign currency became unpayable overnight. Investors fled. Currencies across Southeast Asia, Indonesia, Malaysia, South Korea collapsed in a chain reaction. Dominoes falling. Economies shrank. Unemployment exploded. Governments went begging to the International Monetary Fund for rescue packages that came with brutal strings attached. And who suffered most? Not the global hedge funds that sparked the panic. They were fine. They're always fine. It was ordinary citizens. Savings evaporating, mortgages suddenly doubled in cost, jobs vanishing. The pattern was painfully familiar. Those holding dollars or assets abroad, they survived. Those who trusted local currency, destroyed. Nations dependent on foreign debt were forced into austerity, while Wall Street scooped up Asian assets at fire sale prices. What looked like a local crisis was really a global wealth transfer. The lesson echoes from Byzantium to Argentina to your doorstep. Debt in someone else's money is a death trap. When the storm hits, the creditor doesn't drown. The debtor does. By now, the picture should be painfully clear. Revolutionary France, Civil War America, modern Asia. The same themes playing on repeat like history stuck on a loop nobody bothered to fix. Paper money collapses, debt chains nations and families, and the survivors are never the true believers. They're the ones who recognized fragility before everything cracked. But here's the most chilling part.
Collapse isn't ancient history. It isn't distant. It's happening right now. Lebanon, 2019 to 2021. Banks did something that still feels unthinkable if you live in a developed country. They locked the doors. Citizens woke up, tried to access their money, found their deposits frozen, withdrawals capped at insulting amounts, and their currency collapsing in real time. The Lebanese pound lost over 90% of its value. 90%. A lifetime of savings became pocket change, less than pocket change. People lined up outside banks, begging for access to their own money, only to be told, it's gone. And it wasn't just small savers. Middle-class families, retirees, doctors, engineers, anyone who trusted the system wiped out. The lesson was brutal and clear. Your money in the bank? That's not a treasure chest. That's a loan you've made to an institution. And in a crisis, they can decide just not to pay you back.
Who survived best? Those who diversified abroad, those holding real assets, gold, property, those who'd kept cash outside the banking system. Everyone else? Trapped. Think this sounds far away? Think again. Americans watched their homes repossessed, pensions decimated, while the banks that caused the whole mess got bailed out. Trillions printed to keep the machine running, asset prices inflated for the wealthy, ordinary wages stagnant, stuck, going nowhere. Regional banks in the United States collapsed almost overnight when depositors got nervous. Too big to fail? Just a fairy tale we tell ourselves until the door slams shut. So, how do you protect yourself when everything falls apart? History doesn't give one answer. It gives patterns. In Byzantium, gold. After the Black Death, liquidity to buy abandoned land. In Florence, not trusting too-big-to-fail bankers. In the Confederacy, hard goods. In France, food and property. In Asia, avoiding debt in someone else's currency. In Lebanon, getting out of banks before they locked their doors. The specifics change. The theme stays constant. Survival comes from recognizing what holds real value when illusions collapse. Not from blind trust in paper, not from faith in institutions. And here's the paradox that should keep you up at night. Collapse is both tragedy and opportunity. Same event. Two completely different outcomes depending on which side you're standing on. For the unprepared, ruin, complete and total. But for those with resilience, liquidity, assets that can't be printed into oblivion, it's the moment to acquire wealth at fractions of former costs. After the Black Death, peasants became landowners. Too much land, not enough people to farm it. Supply and demand didn't care about social hierarchy. After 2008, those with cash bought homes, while millions faced foreclosure. Same houses, different owners. History shows protection isn't just defense, it's positioning yourself to acquire what others, under crushing pressure, are forced to give up. But wealth isn't only about what you own, it's about what you can do. The survivors of history weren't just people with gold or property. They were people who could create value when everyone else couldn't. The baker still providing bread, the craftsman repairing tools, the farmer feeding communities, the merchant moving goods across broken borders. These weren't just survivors, they rose during collapse. Because here's the truth nobody prints on money. Currency loses meaning in a crisis. Production never does. People still need to eat, to build, to trade, to live. Those who can meet those needs are never poor for long. That's the deeper protection, not blind faith in institutions, not hoping governments or banks will save you, but the combination of real assets, real skills, and the awareness that illusions always collapse. Every crisis is a transfer, from the many who trusted to the few who prepared. from paper promises to tangible value, from passive savers to active builders. History shows this pattern again and again and again. So the question isn't whether everything falls apart. It always does. The question is whether you'll be one of the many left holding worthless promises or one of the few holding something real. History doesn't repeat, but if you ignore it, it'll crush you all the same. Now, you've seen the patterns. You know what happens. You understand what protects wealth and what evaporates. Most people will scroll past this and keep trusting the system, just like the Romans trusted their denarius, just like the Byzantines trusted their solidus, just like the Lebanese trusted their banks. We know how all those stories ended. But if you'd rather see the next collapse coming before it takes everything, if you want to be on the right side of the transfer for once, subscribe to Money Never Learns, because history keeps handing out the same lessons, and humanity keeps failing the test. The button's right there.